This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Bring back Angela Rayner is the first text to land in my inbox this morning. So thank you to Angela and indeed everybody who held the fort while I enjoyed a few well-earned days by the seaside. We return inevitably to the fray and indeed to the Middle East. Do you want to know something weird? And it only occurred to me as I sat down and thought, do you know what I'm going to begin with this morning? I'm going to begin with the scenes at the airport in Dagestan. Now, I don't know if you're aware of this. I shall give you more details shortly. But then, of course, as soon as I thought to myself, we shall begin with the scenes at the airport in Dagestan, I thought to myself, well, hang on a minute. Some people will immediately jump on me for not talking about the scenes in Gaza, where the carnage is now reaching, as expected, the damage and carnage is now reaching apocalyptic levels. And it doesn't matter which way I go. It's if I started the show by talking about the death toll and the destruction raining down on the Gaza Strip, some people listening, would quite rightly call upon me to talk about the scenes in Dagestan this morning, which, while nowhere near as lethal, were profoundly significant, I think, and important to the bigger picture. But if I started talking about that, which in a sense is news in a way that the unfolding situation in Gaza is not, then other people would quite rightly call me and take me to task for not talking about Gaza. But I'm going to begin with Dagestan because I think this is, if you're interested in understanding how such crazy things can happen in the world, such apparently intractable situations can unfold, I think that the situation in Dagestan is really significant. So it's a Muslim majority region in the south of what used to be the Soviet Union, in the south of Russia. It would historically have been the site of pogroms. It would have been one of the many places in the world where Jews were chased out of their own home at gunpoint or at the end of swords and burning torches. And an aeroplane was scheduled to land from Tel Aviv. At which point a mob assembled and stormed the airport looking for Jews. Tell us where the Jews are was one of the cries coming out. Cars were being stopped in the environs of the airport and passports demanded so that the members of this mob could identify whether or not the passengers were Jewish or the driver was Jewish. They even got onto the airport. Security in that part of the world is probably somewhat laxer than it would be at Heathrow, but they even got onto the runways of the airport and surrounded aeroplanes in the hope of identifying the one that had apparently come in from Tel Aviv and from which Jewish people would soon emerge. Now, I start with that today because one thing that is missing from a lot of the analysis I see is an attempt, at least, to understand what appears at first to be incomprehensible. And that is the existential threat that Jewish people live with all the time. I am not here to excuse what is happening in Gaza. I am simply here to explain support for it. Not support that I feel or share, but support that I think we all have a duty to try to understand. So think about that. Think about, and you will, of course, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not Jewish and I don't live with this experience, I don't live with this history, but I try my hardest to understand it, because if I don't understand it, then I'm no use to anybody, up to and including myself. Imagine what it is like to live with the knowledge that you could be on the wrong end of a pogrom at any point in your life, however secure you may feel. Do you remember the story that was told to us some time ago about always having a packed bag? This would be people that had come to Britain, perhaps on the kinder transport, perhaps as a result of the ministrations of British people rescuing refugees from fleeing the Nazis, Jewish people fleeing the Nazis as their families were rounded up and sent to death camps. And they would keep a bag packed because you never know when you might have to hit the road again. That I think is an absolutely essential part of understanding, if you're interested in understanding what is happening. And I mean, it's medieval. These people at the airport in Dagestan, I grant you there weren't any aeroplanes around in medieval times, but they might as well have been carrying burning torches as they sought to essentially round up Jews. And that's got something to do. It's probably got a lot to do with what is currently happening in Gaza. But that is not a hatred that appeared afresh and anew last night in Dagestan. That is a hatred that has roots going back centuries. That is a hatred that has roots as old as religion itself. And it gets exacerbated, excited, provoked, I don't know. But that's not a response to what is happening in Gaza born yesterday. That is an explosion of hatred, a resurrection of hatred, a bubbling to the surface of hatred, for which the situation in Gaza is clearly a catalyst, but not a cause. And that, I think, is what you have to understand. If, like me, you look at the carnage being inflicted upon Gaza and feel your heart shatter and find yourself wondering how anybody can be in any way supportive of it. Because this isn't a battle or a war in any normal sense. It is an existential battle for survival for Jewish people, for supporters of the Israeli government, for Jewish supporters of the Israeli government. Now, there are tons of Jews who don't support what the Israeli government is currently doing. But this is a conversation about tactics, not cause. And indeed, the pressure that is increasingly being applied to Benjamin Netanyahu himself rather complicates some of the more binary coverage that we see in this country. The Times today has the headline, Netanyahu blames army as public support drains away. So the idea of him being the recipient of unanimous support is simply not true. And very typical of him, if you're even a cursory student of his career, very, very typical of him to try to blame anybody else for things going wrong while doing several laps of honour whenever things go right. So he's trying to publicly blame intelligence chiefs for failing to detect and prevent the Hamas attack on October the 7th. A bad workman blames his tools, you might say, somewhat simplistically. The government and army high command are in turmoil over this, reportedly. The Times of Israel carries criticism from military veterans, including very senior ones, of A, what is going on now, and B, the processes that led to the current situation. But you can't get your head around any of it unless you understand the notion of existential threat. The sense that if we do not protect ourselves on this patch of land, we will go back to a peripatetic existence that our people endured for 2,000 years, give or take, where we have no home. The problem you have when you're trying to navigate this territory is at some point you have to argue with those people. You have to challenge the idea that you can do absolutely anything you want in pursuit of security. And I don't know what those arguments are at the moment. Jonathan Friedland wrote a very good piece about two just causes, two furiously opposed positions that both have right on their side. Listen, Hamas, and I've seen some despicable attempts to support Hamas, tiny but despicable, on the streets of this country and on social media. Hamas is a death cult. You wouldn't want to live under Hamas, especially if you were gay or a woman. But, vacuums are created by terrible situations, and into those vacuums anything can move. But when you speak about the Palestinian people, when you speak about the residents of Gaza in this case, you are not speaking about Hamas. You are simply not speaking about Hamas. When you talk about raising Gaza to the ground or eradicating Hamas, you are making a calculation, whether you like it or not, that essentially says to the world, I don't care how many Palestinian people die. our cause is just. Now, you and I probably, unless you have skin in the game, you and I at that point go, well, no cause is just enough to justify that level of death. But that is where the notion of existential threat comes in. And that is why the scenes at the airport in Dagestan overnight are so pertinent. Because you need to imagine what it would be like to have somewhere inside you the fear of encountering that every time you get off a plane. You have to imagine what it would be like to grow up knowing the lived reality of people, of a mob forming on your doorstep to drive out people like you. And it is not exclusive to the Jewish experience. It happened during the Yugoslavian conflict. Neighbour turned on neighbour. I've been reading about Rwanda, actually, where the massacre there, the genocide there, saw neighbour turn on neighbour. But for a Jew, it's a constant knowledge, a constant fear. And I think if you don't accept that, and if you don't acknowledge that, you're never going to be able to begin to understand why there are no very simple solutions to these problems. You just have to get it. And you have to see what's happening in the Middle East today through the lens of what happened in Russia this morning. You have to see it through the lens of pogroms and persecutions and Holocaust. And then, of course, you come to the point where you ask, well, what is happening to Palestinian people? What word would you use to describe that? Would you use the word genocide? Would you use the word pogrom? Would you use the word persecution? Would you use the word massacre? At what point do the scales, if you like, become equal? Because it's not at the point where the number of deaths is the same. The Israeli government doesn't go, well, we've killed 1,400 of them now, so let's call it quits. And it would, of course, be both absurd and obscene if they did. But this inability to even build the tiniest of bridges between people who care passionately about Israeli lives and people who care passionately about Palestinian lives, the duty to do that falls to those of us who care equally passionately about both. And I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what the first brick of that bridge would be. It's a bit like Boris Johnson's Garden Bridge, isn't it? It's hugely important, very, very expensive and completely non-existent. How do you do that? Can you do that? Is it stupid? Is it offensive? Is it naive? Is it foolish, simplistic, absurd? Even to imagine that it is a doable thing. But my goodness me, that airport footage, bizarrely, because I think we've become a little bit inured, don't we, to scenes of war. We've become a little bit inured to battlefield photography, battlefield journalism, to the aftermath of explosions. We shouldn't, but we do, particularly when it's buildings, devastated landscapes that we look at. But the idea, I mean, there's a man climbing on the wings. They are searching for Jews. And that's not, I mean, to you and to me, that's extraordinary. Right? That's pure man bites dog territory. For a Jew, that's dog bites man. That's utterly normal, utterly unsurprising. It is a fear with which Jewish people live all the time. And now Palestinian people live with a permanent, constant fear of death. But still, we're being told, we're being ordered, we're being invited almost daily to pick a side. I'll just give you an example. I don't think Idiot's Corner would be appropriate at this point, but I reserve the right to reopen it at any time soon. John's in Godalming. He says, oh, for God's sake. So remember, John has listened to the same words that you've just listened to. Oh, for God's sake, James, get a grip and stop ducking the obvious slaughter of Palestinians by Israel's killer. So, there you go. That the same words that you've listened to, same introduction, same thoughts that you've listened to, but the idea that you can't understand what is happening without understanding why that pogrom happened last night. is one you have to reject out of hand, because it's so much easier, isn't it, to just pick a side and start spouting. So I need a question. Well, actually, glancing at the switchboard, apparently I don't particularly need a question, but it's always helpful to have one in the background anyway. And the question is this. I said to you at the very beginning, and you don't. I don't like to say it at the start of these conflicts, but it does always inexorably lead to the question of whether we reach a point where Israel, the Israeli government, the Israeli army, will, with some but limited international support, will pursue a course that brooks no criticism. They will essentially do whatever they want. And I think we've reached that point now. And I want to know whether you agree. Not whether or not you think it's justified for them to do that, or whether or not you think it's a war crime for them to do that. Both arguments, as we've just demonstrated, have legs. But whether or not that is a fair distillation of the situation. We reel still from the terror attack of October the 7th, the 1,400 murdered people. But even there, I use the word murdered to describe what Hamas has done. What word do you use to describe dead children in Palestine, in Gaza today? Murdered? Massacred? Notice it everywhere, don't you? Killed. Palestinian children are killed. Israeli children are murdered or massacred. Is there a difference? Really? I think the two mourning families are picking over the syntax, contemplating the vocabulary of their children's deaths. I don't know. I doubt it. But there it is. Is it simply the case that Israel can and will do whatever it wants now? And Hamas essentially kicked open the doors for them to do that. That's my cautious analysis, and I'm interested in whether or not you agree. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's 20 minutes after 10.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 23 minutes after 10, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Some sort of update news in addition to that situation in Dagestan. There is also a reported request from the Israeli military for a hospital in Gaza to be evacuated. Not only, I think, several hundred patients being treated, including some in intensive care, but also thousands of civilians sort of sheltering in its grounds. And I think that's important to pick up on as well. I don't know the last time you were in hospital, or certainly the last time you were on an intensive care ward, but if someone just came in and said, right, everybody out now, and then shortly afterwards it was bombed. I mean, how realistic is that request to evacuate a hospital or an intensive care ward? Come on, everybody out now. And then you can say, well, we did warn you. But I don't know, does that work as a warning to you? I'm thinking specifically of an intensive care ward in a hospital. If you've got no experience of that, don't worry. But 24 minutes after 10 is the time. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Let's start with Stuart in Harrow. Stuart, what would you like to say? No, Ben in Brighton. Ben, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Ben.
Just as a Jew, I'm terrified right now. I'm in a state of conflict myself internally about what's going on in the world. I think Israel has been given permission to do what it wants. I don't even know if it needs permission to do what it wants. Whether or not I agree with that is, I can't answer that right now, to be honest. I'm scared of all the anti-Semitism I'm seeing online. I can't understand why the inverted commas pro-Palestinian people aren't calling for the release of the hostages.
Can I have a go at that last one? Because I hear that quite a lot. And I think, because, you can't say anything, really, without somebody saying to you, yes, but why aren't you doing that as well? And I think some of it is implicit, clearly. Everybody wants the hostages to be released. But I also think, and I have to choose my words very carefully here, and you'll understand that better than anyone. I look at Hamas and I see a murderous death cult who are immune to diplomacy, reason, and even humanity. And I don't see the Israeli government in that light. So you can call upon the Israeli government to introduce a humanitarian ceasefire, and it might be optimistic, but it is in some ways a compliment to the civilization of Israel, whereas to call upon Hamas to do something would seem to me to be just screaming into the wind. Perhaps that's where some people come from on that. So there's no, in the absence of calls for the release, there's no reason to presume that people are comfortable with the continued incarceration.
But do you think people are thinking it through in the same way that you are? So you're obviously,
but I'm trying to analyse their
behaviour.
Gentleman. Well, let's not get carried away. But I don't think anybody wants the hostages to stay in Gaza, and anybody who does is both vile and in a tiny minority. I worry it's a bit of a fig leaf. So I am now theoretically criticising the Israeli government, and you're saying, well, why aren't you calling for the hostages to be released? And I'm saying, well, of course I want the hostages to be released, but that's not really something that is in the gift of anyone except the murderous death cult that we agree is immune to reason, diplomacy and humanity.
Absolutely. And what I see is, and I don't know if you can see the same, but what I'm seeing is these big marches are more are they more anti-Israel or more pro-Palestinian? Because I think there's a difference, isn't there?
Yes, there always is, but where the line is between those two positions, I don't know. And it's not even anti-Israel; it's anti the current tactics of the Israeli government. And there's loads of critics of the current tactics of the Israeli government in Israel itself. But I think, and I might be naive on this, I think the tiny number of arrests, I think there were more arrests at the Countryside Alliance March in 2000 and whatever it was. And they board up the cenotaph, which they also did for the fox hunting march, and everyone pretends it's some sort of evidence of hatred of the country. But if you ignore the idiots and the liars, then you are left with the question of how many of the 100,000 people marching through the streets of London just recognise that the situation is unsustainable and the solution will involve Palestinian people living with some of the freedoms that Israeli people currently enjoy. I don't know.
It's terrible. And I'm not for the current iteration of the Israeli government. No. They don't represent me as a Jew. I'm a peace-loving, left-wing, gay Jew who just wants the world to sort itself out. But I
nearly said so am I then, Ben, but I was only talking about the last bit, about wanting the world to... That would have been a scoop.
That would have been, wouldn't it?
But no, I mean, and there it is. And I imagine, like me, you feel a bit naive at times for thinking that that's even possible. Can I ask you, because you were in a bad way when you came on, and I don't want to gloss over that. The scenes in Dagestan overnight.
Oh my God, terrifying. It's terrifying. I'm literally having nightmares about house invasions at the moment.
Yeah.
And I never thought about this in my life, but right now it just feels, it's a visceral feeling. And I live in an area where there's not many Jews, but people know I'm Jewish. Sure. Because the school and everything like that. So my neighbours know. So, it's a feeling of isolation as well. The world feels very dangerous at the moment.
It does. And it's something that most of us can scrutinise, but only people like you can truly feel. And that's why I was at such pains this morning to stress that historical knowledge that lies under the pogrom past and the events in Dagestan overnight. And that is where it comes from a lot of the time. This I think Ben used the word visceral, to use it the other way around, this visceral need to protect Israel. Thank you, mate. Take care. I think you're among friends. Almost all of the time in this country. 10:30 is the time. Thomas Watts is here now with your headline.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
10:34 is the time. It is an almost unravelable knot, but it has to be unravelled at some point, doesn't it? I mean, the alternative is a sort of form of perpetual war, but arguably that is what's been in place for decades. Today's conversation chiefly hinges upon the question of whether or not we've reached the point that it often seems we will always reach, which is where in defense of its existential right, Israel will undertake actions that brook no criticism or even perhaps accommodation of international law. That's all. It's not a question of whether they have the right to do that or whether they should do that. It's a question of whether or not that is where we actually are. Stuart is in Harrow. Stuart, what would you like to say?
I don't think that they're not being criticised. There's lots of restraint being urged by UK and America. I also think there's a bit of a false equivalence with the kind of killing of Palestinian children or adults and Israelis. I mean, one is too many, and one life are equal. But one has been killed on purpose, and the other is that awful phrase, collateral damage. So I don't think it helps anyone to say they're murdering them when there's no proof that they are. I mean, there obviously might be some soldiers who do some terrible things, but in general, you'd have to assume that they're doing everything they do is for security reasons and their own protection. Now, you could argue that they, that
well, I don't have to assume that, because I don't think it is, and there's lots of people. No, hang on, just let me tell you why. Because you've even got families of the victims now in Israel complaining that this looks more like revenge than not.
Well, they're saying it's not revenge, and
they're saying it. Look, they're saying the families of the victims are saying it does look like revenge.
The families of which victims?
The victims of the October the 7th terror attack.
That's fine. That's an opinion. It doesn't mean they're right. It doesn't mean they're right.
No, but I'm just saying you can't talk about what people can and can't presume when the families of the dead are actually saying this looks more like revenge than it does look like sort of tactical response. That's all. So, I mean, it's important that their voice is heard. No, I'm not telling you what I think. I'm telling you what they think.
Well, you can presume. You're saying you can presume. You're saying you actually can presume. Well, you can't presume either way. I'm not presuming, and you're not presuming. Okay. You're here. You're in the safety of London.
Yes.
You just don't know. We just don't know. They could do.
What? Sorry, I think I distracted you there semantically, which is unhelpful. So I apologise. What your central point is that you said you don't like the false equivalence, but to make that point, then you have to, and then you use the word collateral. Then you use the word collateral damage. So you're saying that it doesn't matter how many Palestinian people die, it will never be as bad as the murdered Israelis on October the 7th.
No, I'm not saying that at all.
What's you saying?
One is too many. I just say it doesn't help. I just say it doesn't help to call the Israelis murderers and killing, and to make an equivalence between what happened, the massacre, people doing something on purpose, and people not killing people on purpose.
Yes,
that's what I'm saying.
See, that's where I struggle.
One life is the same.
How can you say it's not on purpose?
Sorry. They're not killing. Their aim, the motivation is not to go and kill children.
What is it?
Not their motivation. It's to eradicate Hamas. And Hamas, the existential threat from Israel comes from Hamas. Have you read their founding charter?
Yes, of course I have. I quote it regularly on the programme.
So there you are. So their existential threat is real and it's from someone next door.
But they are not. The Palestinians that are being killed deliberately.
They are not.
You can't shoot. You can't fire a missile by accident. Well, you can, but that's not. No one's claiming that that's what's happening here. Can I run something by you, Stuart?
Sure.
What if Hamas was hiding in Israel? What would the Israeli government do then to eradicate them?
They would seek them out.
But no, what would they do? Would they adopt the same policies? Would they be blowing up Israeli hospitals after issuing a warning to get all the patients out of intensive care?
That's another myth, isn't it? They haven't blown up a hospital.
Well, don't let me distract you from the question I asked. How do you think the Israel? No. I said that they have, prior to presumably bombarding it, they've issued an order to evacuate from the Al-Quds hospital in Gaza City. We can agree on what the facts are. Let's not get distracted from the central question. If Hamas was hiding in Israel, what policies would you still approve of the Israeli collateral damage approach to eradicating Hamas?
I don't approve of anything. I don't disapprove or approve of anything.
Okay. Would you still use the phrase collateral? Would you still use the phrase collateral damage?
Yes, of course I would.
So 3,000 dead Israelis would be a price worth paying for the pursuit of Hamas.
I didn't say the Palestinians.
Well, what are you saying, Stuart? What are you saying?
I'm just saying it's very important to be specific and be very careful.
I am being specific.
Language.
I am being. I am. I'm saying what would your?
You can presume that Israel are murdering.
No. I've done the opposite of that. I've done the opposite of that. I spent 20 minutes at the top of the show outlining the existential motivation of Israel's actions, talked about Dagestan, and I said people will have a problem with however I do this, and I'm grateful to you for proving that. But I think this is a really important question. Whenever I hear the phrase collateral damage, or I hear objections to language or claims that it's not the same, do you think that if Hamas was hiding in Israel, the Israeli army would be pursuing the same tactics in pursuit of them with regard to civilian life?
No, I don't.
Well, there it is. Why not?
Because Hamas are the enemy in another country. It would be a terrorist situation.
It is a terrorist situation. But why would they not go after Hamas with the same tactics in Israel that they're going after them in Palestine, in Gaza?
For obvious reasons.
Well, tell me what they are.
Because they wouldn't be. If they were in a hospital, people do get killed in hostage situations. Yeah. They do eventually storm buildings, and the hospital.
But why is collateral damage acceptable in one?
I didn't say it was acceptable.
Okay. Why is it collateral damage then if it happens in Gaza, but not if it happens in Israel?
The motivation is different between the murderous death cult.
Yes, I agree. I completely agree. But that's why I'm not asking that question.
When you say words like they're doing it on purpose and it's out of revenge, you have absolutely no proof that they are killing
I didn't say they were
people.
doing it on revenge. I said families of the victims of Hamas attacks have warned Israel's government that revenge is not a policy amid mounting concerns about civilian casualties in Gaza. You don't get to put words in my mouth, but you do get to answer.
Say that, and also
you do get to answer my question. Why would it be different for the Israeli army to cause collateral damage in Israel as opposed to in Gaza? Why would it be different?
I would say they're less likely to do that.
No, but this is the question. Why would they be less likely to go after Hamas in the same way if they were hiding in Israel that they are if they're hiding in Gaza?
Because there would be Israelis there.
Pardon?
And they would care less about. They would care more about Israeli lives than Palestinian lives. But they're also.
And that's it. That's all I wanted, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful for your honesty.
Well.
It's tenfold. No, you carry on. Talk about the hostages.
Yeah, well, they're being criticised for ignoring the plight of the hostages. So they are willing to make them collateral damage, if you like. And
okay.
you said that.
Yeah, no, I think that seems possible to me, and I think that's pitiful as well. But what you're doing is edging ever closer to the thing that you described at the beginning of your call as false equivalent.
I'm just saying you've got to be careful with language.
Okay. Well, thanks for the warning. Shireen is in Brighton. Shireen, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. So basically, I strongly feel that Israel have been given the green light. I mean, you can sit there and say they've got the right to defend themselves, but then they need to elaborate on that. You've got the US, you have the UK standing by them, which I'm not saying don't stand in solidarity. But if Rishi Sunak can go all the way to Israel and stand by Israel, but can't bring himself to the border of Egypt, shall I say, and say some words about Palestinians. I think innocent people are being killed, obviously.
I don't know how much difference do you think it makes? I think Biden is a key player on this, and the UN resolution that Jordan brought.
Sorry, James, it gives off the wrong impression. You're having protests all across the world. I think Rishi Sunak should have spoken some good words in regards to Palestinians. If you're going all the way to Israel and you're actually standing in solidarity towards Israelis, and I'm not saying don't, but at least then just be impartial. Be impartial, say some good words about...
Well, I don't know what impartiality looks like. I mean, I never really know what it looks like, Shireen, but in this case, I don't think there's anything wrong. In fact, it would be very wrong of him not to say Israel has every right to defend itself. But the question really that underpins all of these conversations is how much is too much? Where is the line at which you say, no, you've got the right to do that? I mean, I don't want to trivialise everything, but I keep thinking of that Meatloaf song. I would do anything for love, but I won't do that. There's a point where you can't go. You can be supportive, you can be respectful, you can say you've got the right to respond, you've got the right to defend, but you can't go there. Where's there, do you think?
But then you're sending over all the machinery and everything else to support it. So where US are sending that all over, yet so towards you're sending it all the way to Israel. But then as far as I'm concerned, you're actually contributing towards the war in Israel then, because those innocent civilians are being killed.
That's the bit I don't get. I mean, even if you were fully on side with the existential threat justifying almost any action by Israel, and I understand that position, I really do. to leap from that to believing that the eradication of Hamas is plausible, achievable, doable, I can't make that leap, even if I imagine myself in the mind of someone who truly believes that Israel should be able to do more or less whatever it wants in defense of its integrity, its geographical integrity. We must therefore wipe out Hamas. Okay, I can imagine what that feels like, what that thinks like. But this doesn't look to me to be a plausible endgame. And I may be wrong about that, but I've seen very, very, very little evidence that anyone really believes it's achievable. And yet it's the thing that everybody points at as the reason for the continuing carnage. And I would use the word carnage to describe what is happening in Gaza. I think it's hard to think of a more appropriate one. 10:45 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
10:48 is the time. The first anniversary, I think, is it, of Rishi Sunak's premiership today? If I'm reading the runes correctly, I might take a moment to look at how he's getting on with those 5 pledges later. Do you remember the 5 pledges? We're still doing we're still playing the 5 pledges game. I don't know, are we? But before that, we turn our attention once more to the Middle East and this question, really, of whether or not it is simply the case now, as we survey all sorts of horrible images coming out of Gaza, and don't necessarily set much store by the question of, you were warned to get out of the way, whether or not we're at the bit where the reasons that are comprehensible, Israel does whatever Israel wants because America will support them, despite making noises about proportionality and moderation. Once America is on side, all bets are off. 10:49 is the time. Gabriella is in Mill Hill. Gabriella, what would you like to say?
Hi there. I wanted to it wasn't the reason I actually called in, but wanted to mention what you were talking about earlier about collateral damage. I also find it very hard as a mother to talk about the death of a child as collateral damage. Like, clearly we are on the same side with that. I wanted to just add in something you hadn't mentioned in terms of collateral damage, which is many Israelis disagree with things, certain elements of the ground invasion. They disagree with some of the methods that are being used. However, I want you to remember that the Israeli soldiers are part of that collateral damage. They know that, Gaza's probably booby-trapped. It's unbelievably dangerous to be going in there. Hamas have had a huge amount of time to prepare. And actually, you've got to remember that these Israeli soldiers, they're 18, 19, 20, 21 years old. They are on the front line in Gaza. This is how, and this is why I completely agree with what you were saying before about why what happened last night in Russia is so linked to what is going on right now. This is how important they see this cause, and this is how just they see this cause. And this part I agree with. I don't agree with many things. I have real issues with the aid as a parent. I have real issues with the hospitals being evacuated, although more on that later. But honestly, please remember that they are prepared to put their own people out as existential, as collateral damage there. And I think that's huge. That's their own children. They know that the loss is going to be enormous to the Israeli side, but that's how important the cause is to them.
Well, that hinges, though, doesn't
it? Sort of element of the
you're right to remind us of it. And there's no choice involved, is there? I don't think in military service in the Israeli army, it's not as if, as in some cases, you can say, well, you know what you signed up for. I think it's compulsory.
No, there's a big equaliser in society there. They're all from different backgrounds, left, right, religious, irreligious.
But then you come, don't you?
They're very much unified on the cause.
The question of how feasible is it, though? And this is the bit that I think many people who aren't personally invested in.
Well, that's why many Israelis will have an issue with some of the methods being used, because I'm not sure how feasible it is. How can you get rid of an ideology? I will mention what you were talking about with the hospital being evacuated.
Yes.
In the past, Hamas has shown itself as hiding civilians. It's sending rockets from civilian areas, from schools, from kindergartens, from mosques, from hospitals. And they are liars. They are not just terrorists, they are liars. We are listening to their figures from the Hamas, Ministry of Health.
Not today, not from me. If we can just confine the conversation to what we've been doing on this programme. I haven't been reading out statistics from the Hamas-run
Do you believe that Hamas
Ministry
are
of Health.
using their citizens as
Well, I've looked
do
at.
you believe that they're using civilians
there
as
are
human
documented cases of it in the past, but nowhere near enough for you to describe it in the sort of very fluent way that you just did.
There's quite a few verified.
But it doesn't change.
Quite a few verified cases by the UN.
But this is the point, isn't it? About the absurdity of saying that you gave them a chance to evacuate when they're being essentially corralled into these situations by Hamas.
Is it absurd? Is it absurd?
Well,
I think
under your analysis, it
is.
is. So you think that the children,
it's a disaster.
you think the civilians that are being used as human shields have a choice in the process? Do you?
The civilians that from Israel, sorry.
No,
which civilians are you talking about?
The Palestinian civilians you're describing now, the ones that are being used as human shields, do you think they have much choice in the process?
No, I don't think they have a choice at all.
So then giving them a warning to
it is
evacuate.
the Israeli
I just need to get this out. Giving them a warning to evacuate before bombardment is therefore absurd.
It might sound absurd to you. What is the alternative here? I don't think there's going to be a great outcome here, and I think there should be humanitarian pauses in case.
Well, the alternative is treating Palestinian civilians in the same way that the army would treat Israeli civilians if they were pursuing Hamas in Israel.
How can they do that?
I don't know, but that's the job of the military minds, isn't it?
How can they treat Palestinians?
Well, just ask yourself what they would do. There's a delay on the line, Gabriella, which is incredibly irritating for both you and me, and I imagine for everybody listening. But to answer your question, I don't need to tell you what they would do differently. You need to tell me how Israel would pursue Hamas if Hamas was hiding in Israel. And there's the answer to your question.
Well, probably Israelis might listen to the warnings and get out.
But we've just established they don't have any choice. We've just established they don't have any choice about whether or not they are human shields or not, which is why it is, to use my word, absurd to issue some of these warnings. I'm sure some of them are effective. Otherwise, there wouldn't be 1 million people abandoning their homes possibly forever and moving to the other end of Gaza. But you can't claim that people are human shields and claim that giving a warning before bombarding is somehow humanitarian, because they can't both be simultaneously true. Manzoor is in Manchester. Manzoor, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Hope you're keeping well.
I'm all right.
I'm a long-time listener, multiple-time caller. And
you're not supposed to keep a tally, but don't use up the time available. What do you want to say?
I know, sorry, yeah. It's just horrendous. I mean, I'm just listening to everyone, and it's awful what's going on. It's absolutely awful for the Israelis. It's awful for the Palestinians. Where's the humanity in all of this, James? That's where I'm coming from. It's like, where is the talk of peace and love? Where is the talk of someone saying, look, enough is enough now?
Whose job would that be?
Oh, James, I'm a layman, but looking at again, I'm trying to, be balanced and look from the outside. And I think America has such sway with Israel that surely if America was to just say, look, we support you, we've supported you for decades from day dot, okay? This is enough now. Let's stop. Let's evaluate situation and things and where we're at. Yeah? And I don't know, James. I'm not a military person. I'm just calling as a human being who's frightened for the people. I'm distraught for the innocent lives and deaths. And I'm worried about people here. Yes. People seem to be turning on one another. People are taking sides with good and bad. And why take sides? Why can't we just be good, be kind, be caring, be compassionate? And if we see a person is crying and they are Jewish, go and support them. If we see a person who is crying and they're Muslim, go and support them. If we see a person who's crying and we don't know what faith they are, just go and support them. Offer a shoulder, offer an ear to each other. Why are we so intent on figures of death figures in Israel, death figures in Palestine? These are human beings. There's children crying. Children are crying to be saved. They've lost everything. They've lost their parents. But people, all we want to talk about is strategy and military talk. This is true. None of us is a military person. We're not trained in military statistics, but yet we're all calling. We're like armchair managers.
There is an element of that, and the call for compassion would apply in almost all situations
and I'll
of
just
war
say this,
or
James, as well.
situation of
What
violence.
happened on the 7th was atrocious. It should never. I'm a Muslim. I'm a British-born Muslim. And I'm saying this straight. I don't care if there's people that might take umbrage with what I say, but what happened on the 7th should never have happened. It should be condemned, fully condemned. But equally, James, what's happened post 7th must be condemned. Everybody has a right to defend themselves.
My earlier caller would really balk at your use of the word equally.
Why?
I shall tell you why. I shall try to tell you why. Because the act of terror, a terrorist atrocity, the deliberate targeting, this is Stuart's position, the deliberate targeting of completely innocent civilians as opposed to civilian collateral damage as a consequence of a military campaign. He would reject entirely the idea that those two things, in terms of condemnation, should be viewed equally. I'm not sure I'm not sure I agree with him at all, but I hope I have reflected his position accurately.
Yeah, I think I know what you mean. I mean, he's entitled to his opinion, but I'm coming from a compassionate angle and saying that what happened on the 7th was awful. Those innocent people that died on that day.
Yes, of course. No, I mean, to be fair,
but then going into Palestine in this manner, and I mean, how can you strategically?
Well, that's not strategic, is it? This is why I began with the repeated use of that word existential, because I don't think you can begin to understand or analyse the Israeli government's approach and the support of many Israelis without understanding that existential threat. So here is somebody who wants to eradicate you because of the star you were born under, and therefore to defend your very right to survive, you will do things that from the outside may appear to be unconscionable. And I'm explaining, not excusing, and I know you understand that. And I think in conclusion, almost perfectly, Mansour, Ben's been back in touch from Brighton, who of course described himself as a gay Jew, at his words, and he and of course a supporter of Israel, understanding the existential issue, and he's just been back in touch to say the current caller, Mansour, is speaking for me too.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 11 is the time. The next conversation we're going to have is quite a strange one. Very different from the conversation about Israel and the Middle East, but sadly not very cheerful either. But, you know, we can always make each other smile, however heavy-going the territory that we're exploring together might be. You never know, do you, when somebody famous dies, whether or not you're going to take it personally. Sometimes it almost seems silly when other people do take it personally in the passing of a star that you haven't been particularly fond of. It's weird. We're all very different, I guess, in our enthusiasms and our tastes and our passions. And it is a weird side effect of celebrity that we often feel that we know people that we've never met. We often feel that we know people who we've rarely seen off stage, if you like, or with their mask off. The one that I always think of at this point is, and the one I can still almost not talk about, there's an interview that we did together not long before he died, and I wanted to play it to someone the other day, and I couldn't hold it together. It was George Michael. And a story he told, which I don't think he told anywhere else, about coming around after a car accident and having a broad Jamaican accent. And he just told the story, and I just get the giggles. And the gap that he left. I was a mad George Michael fan, like you wouldn't believe, right back through. In fact, I could tell you that in this week, in 1984, I think Freedom was number one. That's how big a George Michael fan I am. And I think No More Lonely Nights by Paul McCartney was in the top 3 as well, which comes from the film Give My Regards to Broad Street. But anyway, I may have seen a tweet earlier this morning that dished some of that detail. But George Michael just hit me so hard and continues to feel such a loss. A song comes on the radio and you have that initial little, oh, yeah. And then you remember that he's dead and it just sort of deflates you a bit, doesn't it? And I found myself responding in exactly the same way to the reports yesterday morning of Matthew Perry dying, the actor who will always be best known as Chandler Bing in Friends. Could you be any sadder? It was just one of those ones that hit you. My wife mentioned it to me. One of the first things that she said, checking the news in the morning, Matthew Perry's died. And I thought, wow, he's not even, is he 55 even? He's basically my age. And I interviewed him as well. And him and George Michael had something in common. Not just the huge cultural impact and affection that the public hold them in, but they were... when I interviewed them, I had a similar sense of haze, mist. I don't know what the situation was with treatment, or whether George or Matthew Perry, when they were in this studio, were on, prescription drugs designed to help them with their other problems and their other addictions. But there was just a slight absence of clarity, which for two people who were so articulate, so supremely articulate and emotionally literate, it was really notable. There's just the tiniest slurring of words, not alcohol-induced or anything like that, but just a sort of a mistiness, a haziness, which didn't affect the interview. I mean, they were all there, but they were just, both of them, and I may be seeing castles in the air on this one, but there just seemed to me to be a weightiness to their verbal movements. That's the best way I can describe it. A sort of sense of being ever so slightly slower than normal speed. If it was a dial and you turn it to the right and we all go super quick and sound like Smurfs, and you turn it to the left and we all slow down. It was as if it was just one tiny degree or two tiny degrees to the left. And a certain slowness, a certain weightiness. And as I said at the beginning, you never know what sort of impact it's going to have on you. How often do you cry, for example, at the passing of a famous person? I remember when Elvis Presley died, one of my mum's friends came round to the house in floods of tears. And I was very young. I wasn't even sure who Elvis Presley was, but these things stay with you, don't they? And there was yes, that's right, a text has come in. They both carried great sadness with them. They both carried great sadness. And what they had in common, of course, was problems with addiction. They often go hand in hand, because it is the brief escape from your sadness that prompts, in some cases, the passage into addiction. But what Matthew Perry did, and yeah, I did cry a bit. I mean, listen, let's not beat about the bush. I mean, I wasn't sitting there sobbing or anything like that, but I had wet cheeks. And I was quite surprised by that. And then I thought, why are you surprised? I had some funny times, on the set of Friends with a guy from GQ. Did I ever tell you this story? Oh, the guy from GQ was like something out of a Graham Greene novel. I only knew on this one gig, this one trip. I can't even remember his name, but I think he was stringing for GQ in LA, and we both ended up on the lot, the Warner Brothers lot, where they were filming at the time both ER and Friends, the two biggest shows in the world. I threw a basketball to George Clooney on this trip, would you believe, after it sort of drifted across the lot to where we were standing, and he was playing outside the ER shooting stage. And then we went into the Friends thing, and it was us and a bunch of foreign journalists. It was a foreign press junket. And this lad from GQ was older than me, and he was quite grizzled. He was having none of it. He wasn't doing the LA shiny kind of, hey, it's great to see you. So, and the bloke showing us around was the shiniest person you've ever seen in your life. He was just so shiny. All I can remember him is that he was so shiny. Everything about him was shiny. His face was shiny. His hair was shiny. His suit was shiny. His shoes were shiny. He was the shiniest person you've ever seen. And I was still quite new to the game, and I was just completely starstruck. All six of them were sitting on the Central Perk set. And there was about 30 of us sitting in the seats where the audience would normally sit watching Friends. And so you've got David Schwimmer, Courtney Cox, Lisa Kudrow, Jennifer Aniston, Matthew Perry, and my personal favourite at the time, Matt LeBlanc. But then, of course, as you get older, your personal favourite becomes Chandler Bing, becomes Matthew Perry. And we had all of the foreign journalists were asking questions like, and I'm not joking now, they were saying things like, hello, do you have a message for your Swedish fans? And they'd say something like, yes. So Courtney Cox would try very earnestly to say something like, oh, yeah, well, obviously we really treasure all of the support we get from the Swedish people, and we're very grateful for. And Matt Perry, you could tell, was very, very attuned to the absurdity of it all. And then someone else would put their hand up and say, do you have a message for your Slovenian fans? And this guy from GQ was itching, he's jumping up and down, and he put his hand up in the air and he tried to ask Courtney Cox a question about diet pills, which she was reportedly having problems with at the time. And the shiny-faced guy just flew across the... No, sit down, you can't say that. And I'm just sitting there giggling my face off, thinking, oh, it's so naughty. This man is so naughty. Everyone knows they're supposed to... Do you have a message for your English? Hello, James O'Brien, Daily Express. Matt, I'd like to ask you, do you have a message for your English? Have any of you ever been to London? Did you enjoy it? Do you have nice memories of London? Black cabs? That was the kind of question you were meant to ask. And this guy just went straight in on diet pills. And I mention it because it kind of highlights the two worlds that he inhabited, the ludicrously shiny world of Hollywood, and then this very dark place that lurked within him for his entire life. I read some really sad stuff this weekend about how his mum, I think, worked for Pierre Trudeau, would you believe, the Canadian Prime Minister, father of Justin Trudeau, the current Prime Minister, who Matt Perry went to school with in Ottawa. But his mum was so busy and so full on that in a couple of interviews, he said something like, I had to be funny to get her to notice me and to sit down, and then I could tell her about my day. And he added, but only after she'd told me about hers. I found that heartbreaking. I found that so poignant. I'm possibly over-blessed in the parent department, in the interest that my parents took in me, or the interest that my mum still does. It's the polar opposite of my experience, thinking that they'd have to get their own day into the conversation before asking how, and that's why he became this very... And he also said something about how when he read the first script for Friends Like These, which is what it was originally called, he thought it was him. He thought someone had been following him around for 20 years and they'd literally written him. But it's something that he said he wanted to be remembered by that really stuck with me. And he said, I want to be remembered for the work I've done with addiction, the work I've done with addicted people. He turned his estate in Malibu into a rehabilitation centre. He spoke endlessly about his own battles. I don't mean endlessly in a bad way. He's so open and so honest. And also talking about how his greatest achievement, he actually said the words, I think, that the best thing about me is that I will help you. If you tell me that you're addicted, you tell me you're an alcoholic, I will help you. And it was almost evangelical in its zeal, the way he spoke about that. So I watched all of that, and then I watched a very famous exchange on Newsnight that he had with, I think he's still got a column in the Mail, a journalist called Peter Hitchens, who you may have come across. And Hitchens was trying to argue that there's no such thing as addiction. There's always a problem, a danger with columnists of being so desperate for attention that you end up in some really, really strange places. And I think probably we've all been a bit susceptible to that over the years if you're in the business of being paid for your opinions. But ending up on television telling an addict that there's no such thing as addiction is quite the turn up for the books. And it occurred to me that that's probably the best way to mark his passing, is to actually remember him for the thing that he wanted to be remembered for. So I would love to do an hour on why Chandler Bing was the perfect sitcom character. But A, I don't think it would be very interesting, and B, I think it would be very repetitive. Instead, I want you to explain what addiction is to someone who doesn't know. I don't know. I don't know what addiction really is, you know. I've had vices over the years, but I don't have an addiction in the sense that if I couldn't have some drugs, or I couldn't place a bet, or I couldn't have a drink, I would climb the walls. I don't even know if that's the right phrase to use. If push really, really came to shove, everything I do that's bad for me, I could stop. But an addict can't. And I want to know what that's like. I want to know how you would describe it. If you've come out the other side, and I know you're never cured, you're only ever recovering. You imagine someone who means well, rather than someone who's just in the business of swapping pungent opinions for beans. Imagine someone who means well and just doesn't quite get it, you know? How would you describe it? And what are the differences? Because I think everybody understands a nicotine addiction, for example, but an opioid addiction? I mean, what are the differences? Just in terms of the damage that the thing you're addicted to does to you, I think. How do you explain addiction to someone who doesn't really believe in it or doesn't quite get it? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's 11:16.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
19 minutes after 11 is the time. This is nice from Jude. I think part of the sadness about loved stars like Matthew Perry and George Michael, both of whom died too early, is that they brought such happiness into the lives of their fans, yet they never seemed to find it for themselves. And I think it is that sadness that for some people opens the gates to addiction. And partly in respect of Matthew Perry's dying wish to be remembered at least as much for the work he did in this field, the field of addiction, as for the work he did on the most successful sitcom ever, I think. We're going to talk about addiction more than we're going to talk about Friends. Chris is in County Durham. Chris, what can you tell us?
Yeah, I just wanted to briefly tell you my tale. I've been addicted to opioids, codeine, the doctor gives me it, and cocaine, and to a lesser extent alcohol. And your producer asked me, how does it feel like? And I described it as living with the devil on my shoulder and walking through hell.
When did it start?
I've had a back pain problem for quite a while, and the doctor gave me the painkillers to deal with that. And I went and told the doctor fairly recently about the cocaine, and he said, "You're not alone. An awful lot of people who develop depression because of your chronic pain tend to look for other things to prop you up, and so it's quite common that it's cocaine and alcohol."
Because you temporarily feel lighter. Mentally, you feel a little bit better. I must admit, the opioids certainly feel a lot better than the cocaine, but right.
The cocaine is there to take the mental pain away.
How do you define addiction, Chris? What's the point at which you would have admitted to yourself, actually, I am addicted to this?
Occasionally, whilst taking cocaine, I feel like I want to cry because I can't stop.
Right.
And I'll have a moment of clarity where I feel that this is ridiculous. What you're doing this for?
Mm.
You know, you wouldn't cut yourself and say and think that that you're helping yourself, just the same as you wouldn't. I don't know. I'm finding it difficult to describe.
Of course you are. When did you start trying to describe it? When you went to the doctors, do other people know? Do people around you know? How hard do you work to hide it?
I did work extremely hard. Literally nobody knew.
Right.
Nobody knew. Not even my friends. I would be high as a kite, and none of my friends would know that I was high as a kite all evening. I recently, I went and told the doctor, and I went and told my partner, who's trying her very best to be sympathetic and supportive, but she also realises that I've spun a web of lies for however many years to try and cover it up. So it's had quite an effect on our relationship.
I'm sure it has. And how does it end?
Well, I'm speaking to a lady from the local recovery centre.
Good.
And I'm trying my best to get a handle on it, but I'll also openly admit that sometimes the most appealing solution is to
check out,
not be here anymore. Yeah, check out. I was thinking of a nice way to put that.
Well, thank you for choosing your words so carefully. Can I ask you one last question, and you don't have to answer it?
Okay.
If I locked you in a box or stuck you on a desert island and you couldn't get hold of anything, what would happen?
I would have hot pins put pins under me skin for a couple of days. I might feel like I'm drowning for a couple of days or a period of time, and eventually it would stop.
I hear you, and you just can't get to that place.
I'm trying my best.
I know you are, and you're very brave sharing it with us. I think that's got to be the start, hasn't it, mate?
Thank you.
Self-honesty, and then hopefully self-care. I wish you all the very, very best. I really do. Thank you, Chris. The opioids thing is big, huge in America, but big here as well. As they say, America sneezes and we catch a cold. But things prescribed originally in good faith ending up causing untold misery. And, of course, then you start trying to fill the hole that the prescription drugs filled with stuff that is even less safe. Sophia is in Elephant and Castle. Sophia, what made you pick up the phone?
I heard you talking about addiction and what addiction means, and it rang a real bell with me because I've been off and on addicted to cocaine for, it's got to be about 20 years. 20, 30 years.
How do we define addiction as opposed to just it's something that you do off and on? What's the difference?
It starts off as recreational use. So, when you go out, you go to the pub and you think, I'll have a few lines and I can drink more.
Right.
And that was it for a very long time. And it started becoming compulsive even if I wasn't at the pub. I mean, I'm in a position now where I take coke virtually every day of the week. And I question myself as to why. It doesn't make me feel any better, but it makes me feel numb.
Right.
And, I've had a lot of bad experiences in my life. Yeah. And the cocaine takes it away. It makes those thoughts of what happened to me in the past go away.
Right.
I suffered dreadfully with anxiety and depression, and I had a therapist and she dragged up things from my past that should never have been dragged up, and then that just pushed me back into it again.
Oh dear.
I've had 5-6 years of not taking.
Right.
And then something happens and it's almost like that's the answer.
Like a crutch.
Yeah, absolutely like a crutch. Anything happens, I'll go and get some coke. I lost a job because of it. They didn't know that I was addicted, but I couldn't function properly at work and I lost a job because of it. And it was a very good job. I mean, people imagine addicts to be people who are dirty, scruffy people wandering around the street. I'm not. I'm the complete polar opposite of that, Yeah. I dress very well. I present myself very well. Nobody knows the extent of my addiction at the moment. It's probably, it's in the region of quite a lot of money a week. I don't even want to think about how much.
Go on, I'm going to make you.
You're horrible. Okay, so I had an inheritance of almost 10 grand, and that was 3 months ago, and I've probably got about 4 grand left.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing is, it's they talk about dealers. There's 2 different types of dealers. There's a dealer and there's a pusher.
Okay.
The dealer you go to and they don't bother you, but the pusher, even if you don't phone them, they'll send you a message, I'm about today.
Right.
And that's like a trigger, and you think, oh. And you don't want to say yes. You really don't. Every part of your being doesn't want to say yes, but that little cocaine monkey that sits on your shoulder is the only way I can describe it. It says, go on, send the text. Yeah. And you do, and it's almost, it's a compulsive thing. It's an absolutely compulsive thing. Nobody wants to be an addict. And I think this is the thing, people think that it's easy to get out of.
Yeah.
Even to get into a rehab. Unless you've got a ton of money, which I did have, but I didn't. I chose not to spend it on that. I hold my hands up to that.
Yeah.
But you've got to be clean to get into rehab.
Right. So it's a vicious circle.
It is an absolutely vicious circle. And I honestly, I wish that I could have the answer for people to get out of it, but honestly, I don't have an answer.
Well, if there was an answer, there wouldn't be any addicts, Sophia. So don't beat yourself up about that. When that 6 years, that last big period when you were not on the drugs, not on the cocaine, what was your life like? What were you like? How were you different?
I was bouncier. I was not. I know that sounds crazy.
No, it doesn't. Not at all.
But how can I say? I always have, at the moment, I have the worry about, I'm going to get some gear today, am I not going to get something today? Will I, is that phone call going to come? And then, like, sometimes if I phone and they're not answering the phone, then I think, oh, sorry.
That's all right.
But I think, oh, poo.
Yeah.
What am I going to do today? And
so it's a guiding light. I mean, it is essentially your constant companion, whether you've got drugs with you or not. The addiction is your constant companion. Absolutely.
I don't have friends. I literally, I don't have friends, and like I have in the recent past, I have thoughts where, like your last caller, I just think I might as well just check out, because what is the point?
Because you just need to get bouncy again, and then
I do, but I just want the listeners to appreciate that being an addict is not a filthy, dirty thing that people think it is.
That's a really good point. It's a really good point. And in fact, the people that you're describing are the ones that have just completely fallen off the planet, aren't they? They're not the ones that are most addicts are going to be holding it together. From the outside, most addicts.
Absolutely. From the outside looking in, like no one would ever dream that I'm an addict. And there you go, I've said it, I'm an addict, and I think just saying that to somebody has actually pulled a little light bulb there, because to say it to myself, it means nothing.
Yeah.
But to say it to somebody who clearly you're concerned about people like me, else you wouldn't have this section in your show.
True.
And honestly, people like me really appreciate that you do shows like this, and that you're brave enough to have people like this actually on your show.
No, the bravery's at your end. The bravery's coming from you and from Chris. So I'm grateful to you for the kind words, but let's not get things the wrong way around. And it's the reason I do it is partly because of the stuff I read about Matthew Perry this weekend, and the belief that that help works, that there is light at the end of the tunnel, that your bounce can be brought back. But
I really want my bounce back, I'm telling you. I really do want my bounce back, because I'm actually quite cute when I'm bouncing.
Oh, don't doubt it for a moment, Sophia. Don't doubt it for a moment. And I hope that I hope this has helped. I hope there is something in just looking yourself in the face, but then also telling the world that here we are.
Absolutely.
You start with meetings, I think. I had a few people texting me. You've got to go through that door, haven't you? Sit down with other people. So that would be. Yeah. I'm not here to counsel you or advise you.
Do you know what?
What?
I'm going to try this week to find a meeting.
All right.
I am. I'm going to let you and all these people that are sending in texts to you. I'm going to let them be my inspiration, and hopefully, like in six months down the line, I can phone you back again and say, you know what? It helped.
It's a date.
I'd love to.
It's a date, all right? You take care of yourself, all right?
Thank you so much for allowing me to vocalise on your show. I appreciate it. I'm a regular listener.
Well, thank you for telling people who needed to hear stuff what you told them, because it's, as you say, not a choice that anyone would make. Thank you, Sophia, and good luck. You can do this. 32 minutes after 11 is the time. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
11:36 is the time. A lot of love for Sophia, but no pressure. That wouldn't be helpful at all. So just stay safe. And speaking of safe, the COVID-19 inquiry is underway, with some fairly big names due in front of it this week, starting today. Henry Riley is going to be among the colleagues who help me keep across this, because I do have a bit of a pet theory that the newspapers that were putting enormous pressure on the government to prioritise their own sales over the health of the population are unlikely to report in great detail the tales of their own editors and owners putting great pressure on the government to prioritise sales over the safety of the population. But there's a lot of other stuff going on as well, not least the partying and the exchange of messages between key players. So it is Martin Reynolds who's been giving evidence first this morning, known affectionately, Henry, as...
Yes, colloquially as Party Marty.
Party Marty.
So he is in front of the COVID inquiry today. To remind your listeners, he was the principal private secretary to the Prime Minister from October 2019 until March 2022. So obviously a really key period during the pandemic. It's mostly advisors at the moment. We're in stage 2 of the inquiry. That looks at how decisions were made in government. The way they phrase it is examining the core UK decision-making and political governance. So they start with the advisors, and then it looks like on the 11th of December, we'll hear from Rishi Sunak at the COVID inquiry, and the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson later that month in December as well. That's currently the expectation. In terms of Martin Reynolds, we reference Party Marty. That's because of 2 particular emails he sent. Again, just to remind your listeners, the first was in May, the 20th.
They're your listeners as well, Henry.
Our listeners.
Yeah.
Really. The 20th of May 2020, where he essentially said it'd be nice, lovely weather to have some socially distanced drinks in the number 10 garden this evening. Join us from 6, and the key phrase being bring your own booze. And then again, he was responsible for the Prime Minister being, quotes, ambushed by cake, which Conor Burns, his colleague, once famously said. He sent an email around to staff saying, for the PM's birthday today, we're having sandwiches and cake in the cabinet room, so do come along and wish the PM happy birthday. He is in front of the COVID inquiry today. That started off on a bit of a sour note as well from Baroness Hallett. She's the chair of the inquiry, and she's become particularly concerned with some reports in the media over the last few days.
May I just start this week's hearings by saying this? There have been several press reports in the last few days, including this morning, suggesting that materials confidential to the inquiry and the core participants have been shared with the media. I wish to remind all those involved in the inquiry, as core participants and witnesses, of the need to maintain the confidentiality of the materials with which they have been provided unless and until they are used in the inquiry proceedings.
Now, it looks like some of that was aimed towards George Osborne, the former Chancellor, who said he'd seen, quote, staggering messages from key advisors like Dominic Cummings. This was a few days ago, of course, before we've seen the evidence. So Baroness Hallett trying to really sort of stamp that out from a very early stage. When it comes to Martin Reynolds, again, one of the key debates, James, and we've seen this over the last few months, is with regards to how relevant WhatsApps are. Again, the inquiry saying that they view every message that was sent from the phone, essentially the private secretary and the Prime Minister at that time, as important. He said instead that rather it was not as important as the inquiry was making out.
And a lot of the WhatsApps you are seeing, it seems to me, are exchanges which people could have been doing previously by telephone or in corridors or things like that. They are now just recorded in WhatsApp, but are ephemeral in nature, in the same way as if there's a conversation about a policy matter before people go into a substantive discussion in the corridor where someone might say something to me or to others. We're not necessarily recording all of that because it's ephemeral in nature. Where the decision takes place and the process leading to that decision are recorded in a normal way.
You're not suggesting, are you, that the vast majority of these COVID-related WhatsApps are irrelevant?
No, I think they're relevant to the COVID inquiry, but in terms of the decision-making process and the obligation on civil servants to record formally steps in the decision-making process, it's a bit different.
So I'm not following. Why aren't they part of the decision-making process?
Because in any decision, there is all sorts of ephemeral discussions around a policy. Not all of those discussions are recorded in full, even in the main meetings themselves.
But, Mr. Reynolds, they are all relevant, are they not, to the state of mind of the sender and indirectly the recipient? Mm-hmm. They are all relevant to the debate about COVID and the decisions which were then being taken.
That's interesting, isn't it? I mean, actually, some of these conversations being echoed in Scotland as well at the moment, which will have its own inquiry. But is he essentially, the tension there is between Reynolds thinking he gets to decide what's relevant to the inquiry and what isn't, and the inquiry contending that actually, no, mate, we do.
Yeah, and how many times have we said that over the last few months? I think the word ephemeral, which he kept using, Martin Reynolds, really irritated Hugo Keith, who's the counsel to the inquiry. On those messages as well, what was also apparent, James, and this is something we haven't heard before, is that Boris Johnson, according to Martin Reynolds, didn't realise that all of his WhatsApps would become public, and they were going to try and warn him that actually these will come out in a subsequent COVID inquiry. It also led to the Cabinet Secretary, Simon Case, calling Boris Johnson mad.
Simon Case, PM is mad if he doesn't think his WhatsApps will become public via COVID inquiry, but he was clearly not in the mood for that discussion tonight. We'll have that battle in the new year. Martin Reynolds, that is, of course, you, agree. Thanks for your help. What was the battle about, Mr. Reynolds?
I cannot recall, but I imagine that the Prime Minister, I'm afraid I can only speculate, but I imagine he hadn't realised that all of his WhatsApps would become public via the COVID inquiry.
I think the most excruciating exchange, by the way, James, was when essentially another discussion about WhatsApps. It seems to have been quite bogged down on WhatsApps at the moment, but obviously it's very important, is the disappearing messages function, which essentially means your messages can disappear. You can turn on a certain feature. There was a WhatsApp group set up by Martin Reynolds, which was, as he described it, a sort of filter. So he didn't have to send everything to Boris Johnson. He said the Prime Minister's very busy. I'll put it in this WhatsApp group and it can then be transparent. It was active for about 5 months, that WhatsApp, but then he turned on the disappearing messages feature for some particular reason, and that was something Martin Reynolds was questioned about.
Why did you turn on the disappearing message function around the time that the Prime Minister announced a public inquiry into the COVID pandemic?
I cannot. I can guess or I can speculate, but I cannot recall exactly why I did so. So I don't believe it was intended to prevent the inquiry from having sight of this. It could, for example, have been because I was worried of someone screenshotting or using some of the exchanges and leaking them.
Well, these are your closest colleagues, and you had obviously been engaging with them in this WhatsApp group for many, many months. It wasn't that the system had changed, requiring you to no longer engage in this WhatsApp communication. You just turned on the disappearing function.
Correct.
This WhatsApp group is not available because the disappearing function was turned on by you in April 2021.
Correct.
Right.
And then lastly, James, in the last few minutes... Pause you briefly. Of course. We probably neither of us know the answer to this question, but it often comes up in our contemplations that sometimes the technology overtakes the rules. So presumably if they were communicating with each other via different means, there would be rules in place about disappearing functions, or the equivalent would be putting your post through a shredder, wouldn't it, or something like that. And yet WhatsApp presumably doesn't quite fall under the purview of any existing regulations.
Well, what Martin Reynolds says is that in meetings, not everything is minuted. So you have unofficial meetings and that it's not minuted. So in that sense, the reason why it was all done on WhatsApp was because you had various people working from home because of the COVID inquiry and whatnot. But then actually what Hugo Keith Casey is saying is that some of these weren't just conversations like you might have in a corridor. These seem to be crucial because he's seen the first 5 months of that WhatsApp group.
Right.
These weren't just sort of conversations whereby it was a preamble. These are actually important decisions.
And then they turned it off.
And then they turned on the
When do we
messages.
get to see the first? Do we get to see the first 5 months of the?
They've released some of them.
It's
So
all
that was when Simon Case was calling Boris Johnson mad.
Of course, yes.
If he doesn't think. And then lastly as well, James, Martin Reynolds has been quizzed in the last few minutes or so regarding the tensions in Downing Street between Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings. It's been very interesting actually, because he was suggesting that sort of pre the election, everything was going very smoothly. There seemed to be a good atmosphere in Number 10, but as he put it, that shifted.
It was increasingly clear that the Prime Minister's and Dominic Cummings's agendas were not overlapping, or were overlapped in part, but were quite different. And that, in that period, meant that we were starting to try and work out what are the priorities, how do we deliver this, and what are we, in a sense, what are we trying to achieve as a collective? And that dynamic, I think, was starting to become more prominent. The other dynamic, I would say, during this period is a sort of unease with some of the messaging and actions taking place. So it was during this period that we were talking about the appointment of various, and I use quotes here, weirdos and misfits, and bringing in very different people into Downing Street. And we had the case of Mr. Sabisky, who you remember is a advisor brought in who had unusual views on eugenics, and after 3 days he resigned.
Unusual views on eugenics. There it is. Master of understatement. What's coming up later this week? What else have we got to look forward to?
Well, later this afternoon, we've got Lee Kane, who was the Director of Communications in Downing Street. There's one other person today, Imran Shafi, who was another private secretary for Boris Johnson. But then crucially tomorrow, all eyes on Dominic Cummings, who's in front of the inquiry.
What time?
It's from 10:30.
Have you heard about, has he been up a mountain preparing himself or something like that? Have you heard about this?
I haven't heard about that, actually.
What was it? Well, someone told me this morning. No, he went to an isolated island.
Oh, did he?
To get himself in the zone. I think he thinks he's Shogun or sort of character in Kill Bill or something like that. Actually, no, I'll do that another day. Henry Riley, splendid. We may see you again if something pops up between now and 1 o'clock that you think is of interest to your listeners. Then I look forward to you bringing it in.
A lot of pressure.
A lot of pressure. It's 11:48.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
11:51. As far as I can tell, the nickname Party Marty for the former civil servant that you just heard described, well, he's a SPAD, isn't he? He's a principal private secretary. The nickname Party Marty came from within Westminster. It's not one that's been applied subsequently by journalists. It was kind of what they called him in the office, which speaks volumes, doesn't it, really? 11:51 is the time. Back to the question of addiction, the passing of Matthew Perry, the star of Friends, one of those people who just brought so much joy into other people's lives without ever really being able, apparently, to find enough in his own. And a question in honour, really, of his expressed wish for his legacy, a question about addiction. The simplest question of all, what is it? Because everyone who has got a sort of flirtation with excess. You wish you could drink a bit less, you wish you could smoke a bit less, you wish you could eat a bit less, whatever. But addiction is something altogether different. What are the key definitions of those differences? 11:52 is the time. Dean's in Leyland. Sorry to keep you, Dean. What would you like to say?
You're all right. Thank you very much. At first, I'd like to say I think you're brilliant. And honestly, I've got your books, I've got your board game, and I will be getting your new book. But anyway, before we get deeper, I've been. I'm 47 now. I've been an addict. I've been a heroin addict since I was 16. And drink came a bit later than that, maybe 25, 26. So I've had homelessness and all that. At the minute, I've been married 6 years. I'm still on a methadone program. Right. I do still use sometimes, now and again.
When? What times? What times?
I'd say like once a month at the most.
As a treat, a treat, or at your lowest point, or when? What? I mean, or is that a silly question?
It's not. Yeah, it's not really. I don't really get to the point. It's like what I was trying to explain to your producer is like when you've been on it like since you were 16, so it's more than half your life, and every day you've got something else. So your normal is different to everybody else's normal. How you're feeling, So when you don't have anything, that's everyone else's normal. But you don't feel that great when you're like that. Do you know what I mean? Do you get what I'm saying?
Yes, of course I do.
Yeah,
of course I do.
Yeah.
But is there no place where you do? I mean, you can't even remember, can you? What you were like before you were 16? Did you hear Sophia talking about bounce? The earlier caller, just having if you were clean. You're saying you think you'd feel rubbish.
Yeah. To be fair,
right.
And most of the, like I said, even when I'm clean of not using the drug, I'm still on the methadone program.
Yes, of course.
I work. I've got a wife. Nobody knows. As much, they know I'm an addict. They know I've been an addict because in my town it's a bit it's a bit hard not to know. Not to know me, to be fair. Sure. But it's a smallish town.
I understand.
But yeah, so it's always been like, but now I am trying to change. I'm trying to change things now, but
Why?
it's still hard.
Why
it's still well because I've got my wife and I love my wife. Like I said, I knew her at school, but we got back together about 7 years ago, and we got married like a year later. I've got a stepson. I've got grandchildren. I've just had a new grandchild.
So you've got responsibilities. You're very young to have a grandchild.
I've got 3 grandchildren, to be fair.
So I understand that, and of course the drive to change. What is it? If you had to explain, well, you don't have to pretend because you're talking to me. Someone who just doesn't quite get it. Someone who thinks, well, you just need if you could just sort of just pull yourself together or just demonstrate a bit. What is it that happens that makes that sound stupid to you? Yeah,
it's not about pulling. I mean, I've got like quite an obsessive person. If I like something, I really like it.
Yeah.
If I start listening to somebody like you, I've got a bit not obsessive, but you know what I mean. I'll get everything you've got and listen to everything you do.
Right.
Or like Arsenal, I love Arsenal, so I'll get everything you got. I love Bob Dylan, get everything he's got, listen to everything.
So you can't do anything you can't do moderation, is what you're telling me. I think.
Yeah, basically, yeah. If I really like something, I really like it, and it was always for me. It always seemed like I wanted to try heroin. For some reason, Grange Hill, Zamo. Yeah. Like when that was on, and everyone just say no and all that, and everyone was, and I seemed to want to do what he were doing.
Well, that backfired then, didn't it, on you? That campaign.
I know. That's what I thought.
I don't think you were alone. I think, and I know that. I know Lee listens to the show. Actually, Lee McGuire, who played Zamo. I think that happened a bit more than anyone was expecting, but it is an odd one, isn't it? It appealed to something within you that you didn't even know was there. Yeah.
To be fair, yeah. I mean, obviously, I started on smoking weed and drinking young and that and stuff like that, and didn't have the best of childhood.
Well, there it is.
All the rest of it.
Well, don't say all the rest of it. You don't need to gloss over that. It's not fair. It's not fair to have an unhappy childhood. It's not fair. Sophia mentioned terrible things that happened in her past, and that seems to be a recurring theme in addiction.
My wife keeps saying that. But
what does she keep saying?
Saying I should confront it and sort it. But I mean, to me,
she is right.
Yeah, but it just happened. I know what you say. I've obviously listened to your book. Your second one was brilliant with the the school stuff and your letter and that. But but for me, I just feel like I just know what's happening. I know why I'm like I am, and even these groups. I've tried groups and stuff like that, but they just tell me stuff I know. It's just I just don't seem to get anything new from it. You know what I mean? I do know what
you mean, and you know what I think. I don't think it's about you now. I don't think it's about 47-year-old grandfather of 3, Dean. I think it's about 13-year-old Dean, 12-year-old Dean, who no one looked after. And what you will get in the right group and in the right therapy, you'll get encouragement and help to make sure that you now tell him then that he's safe now. And I don't think anyone's ever done that for you. And I know it sounds a bit wonky.
No, I've read, like I say, I've listened to your book. I know exactly what you think I do.
But until you feel it, I can't communicate it to you. Hey, no one loves you as much as your wife does. So ignore my book and focus on what she's saying. And good luck. What are you going to do? Do you know? You don't have to tell me. How are you going to?
I'm cracking it. I'm still at the CDT, which is a community drug team. I'm still with ours. Like I say, I'm still on methadone prescription. So I'm still trying. I'm still at it. I'm still not using every day. So it's and my drink. I do drink every day, but that I have cut that down a bit. But it's I'm trying. I'm on my way. I'm getting there.
I hope so, mate.
Brilliant to talk to you.
Dean, it's been my pleasure, and I wish you all the very, very best. You know I do. Stay safe, and I guess it sounds trite for a reason, doesn't it? It is just one step at a time. The time now is 12 noon.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 3 minutes after 12. Lynn's been in touch. Hi, James. I listen to you every day, but can I just say that last hour moved me so much. We all go about our daily lives and have no idea of the struggles that some people have. Much love to your callers. Well, I second that, Lynn. You're absolutely right, and very much a sort of conversation that is nothing without callers. Thanks also to Martin for your kind words as well. Rakesh has been in touch to say that Gabor Mate has worked a lot on addiction, and he has a great definition in his book Hungry Ghosts, which he quotes: "My definition of addiction is any behaviour that gives you temporary relief, temporary pleasure, but in the long term causes harm and has some negative consequences, and you can't give it up despite those negative consequences." And from that perspective, you can understand that there are many addictions. You really can. And I will mention that Gabor Mate appeared on Full Disclosure last year. It was an absolutely fascinating hour or more, and one of those ones that I could have happily continued forever, when he was over here to talk about his latest book. And he also talked about the generational trauma, inherited trauma, in his case, fleeing the Holocaust, which is pertinent to some of the other conversations that we're having at the moment as well. But do check out the Gabor Mate Full Disclosure if you can on Global Player or wherever you get your podcasts. 5 minutes after 12 is the time. We will return to that territory there. I think we kind of owe it to Matthew Perry in a way, don't we? But I want to move on now. I want to keep the three segments of the show separate today, although we may have another dip into this COVID-19 inquiry where... Well, here's the thing. How do you do it as a topic? Because I don't think it worked before I went away. We didn't quite get the question right. Brian's been in touch to say the question is perhaps an open question of what do you want from the COVID-19 inquiry? Is that a good question? Should we do that later in the week? What do you want personally from the COVID-19? It's a better question than we managed to come up with. What did we come up with before I went away? Can you remember? We didn't even have one. Did we do one of those hours where I just warbled and expected the phones to ring? With 9 times out of 10, right? 99 times out of 100, it works, doesn't it? But that was one of those occasions when it didn't really work because I didn't have a question. And then I'd sort of joke about not having a question. I think I'm so clever because I'm going to do a phone-in show without asking a question. He's fantastic. The king of the centrist dads. And then very, very, very occasionally... You don't get it. So, yeah, you're right. So can we take Brian's question and run with it a little late? What do you personally want from the COVID-19 inquiry? We may have a look at that. Not today. Don't ring in on that now. 6 minutes after 12 is the time. Okay, simple question time. Why are young people taking less action to lower their carbon footprint than older Britons? They are also much worse at taking simple steps to help the environment, such as recycling. It's a fairly comprehensive survey. The differences are not enormous, I should stress. But the cut-off point is, the numbers are really, really interesting. So if you say, I recycle as much, I want all your answers to this question, okay? Because I've already thought of one that may not be accommodated by the survey questions. You can sometimes skew a poll slightly by asking a question. The immigration polls undertaken by, if you like, racist apologists sometimes are the most misleading on this one. You know, if you say something like, do you want your country to be overrun by foreign criminals? And obviously 100% of people say no. And then the headline somehow becomes 100% of people want tougher immigration rules. And you thought, well, hang on a minute. That's not... So you're getting the question right. I recycle as much as possible. Would you answer yes or no to that question? I recycle as much as possible. Go on, answer it. You do? Do you? Really? Really? Oh, God, everyone's nodding at me. And they're all young. Well, not Keith. But good grief. Okay. Well, what do you mean by as much as possible? So I have a recycling bin in my other bin, but sometimes if the bin man is outside and I've missed it, I'll just chuck it all in the bin and chuck it in the bin. So no, would you never do that? Okay. I'm 45 to 54. That's age. And that puts me in the second highest category of people who recycle as much as possible. 18 to 24-year-olds are in the lowest category. Now, I find that genuinely surprising. Genuinely. By the way, I don't do it often, by the way. I'm like once a year or something like that. But if I were to go through my bin, which would be slightly odd behaviour. I think the last time I did that was when I thought I'd lost my wedding ring. If I were to go through my bin, I would find some stuff in it that was recyclable. And I'm sure most, would you not? Nothing at all. All right, what about plastic bacon wrappers? So that's not a bottle. So I've got do you know what we need? We need more bins. We need 7, I think. We need 7 recycle. That's what we need. We need 7 recycling bins. And then we could, if only a politician would think of that. Okay, so I recycle as much as possible is a question to which I would answer no. I am conscious of the fact that I could do better. But in order to answer yes to that question, you have to actually believe that if you went through your bin now, on bin day, you would find nothing in the black bag that could be in the plastic buckets. Nothing at all. Not even a bottle top, perhaps, or a okay, I stand corrected on that one. I have reduced the number of flights I take a year. Yeah, I have, actually. We would generally, I think when I even started in this job, we would generally fly every holiday. I just got back from Norfolk. I just got back from the North Norfolk. So I have reduced. We would definitely have spent half term somewhere hot, probably Morocco at this time. Yeah, Morocco's nice. Get yourself out there. So I have reduced the number of flights that I take. And that would put me, as a 45 to 54-year-old, get in. The second highest. So which age, this is bizarre. Which age group do you think is the most committed when it comes to both recycling as much as possible and reducing the number of flights that you take a year? This is going to drive a coach and horses through the editorial policy of the Daily Mail and the Daily Telegraph. Which age group do you think it is? I'll give you your choices. 18 to 24, 25 to 34, 35 to 44, 45 to 54, 55 to 64, or 65 plus. Now, which of those age categories, which of those age groups do you think provides the most positive answers, the most yeses in response to the question, I recycle as much as possible? Which of them do you think it is? I'll give you a clue. It's the same age group that also answers yes most to the question, I have reduced the number of flights I take a year. It's the 65 plus. That doesn't make sense to me. But we often have our most interesting conversations about things that don't initially make sense to me. I would have, if you'd asked me to put money on it, I would have put it the other way around. I would have said, no, of course the 18 to 20, but now I'm just thinking about my own house. I don't know how conscious my teenagers are about this. Yeah, they're pretty conscious, and they're big on the flight stuff as well. So if you'd asked me to put money on it, I'd have said that it would decrease with age. So you'd start at the 18 to 24-year-olds who recycle everything, and you slowly see a little decrease in how, what's the word I'm looking for? Conscientious. How conscientious they are, going to the 65 plus year olds who probably recycle less than almost anybody else. And it is exactly the other way round. It's the polar opposite of my presumption or prejudice or whatever you want to call it. And the question I have for you is why? Some of it might be circumstantial. How easy is it to recycle if you've got a shared room in a cramped flat, for example? Presumably not as easy as it is if you've got 7 bins in one of your gardens for recycling, but still, you could almost certainly go further. So I think we'll just do the why of it. The Times, predictably enough, go in on Greta Thunberg. They say Greta Thunberg may be the voice of a generation alarmed about climate change, but she is also the voice of a generation failing to do much about it. It's one survey, but I don't see any reason not to take it at face value, not to take it seriously. And what I want is your answer to the twin question, not just the question of why young people are the least likely to recycle as much as possible, 03456060973, but also why the oldest people in the country are the most committed to recycling. I'll take anything you've got, either like me, stepping from the outside, looking at the phenomena and trying to work them out, or from within, as someone in that category, 18 to 24, who can say, well, look, it's obvious, James, I'd love to recycle more, but I can't because ... Or somebody who is older, saying, well, of course we're going to recycle more than the young people do because ... Jonathan's in Manchester. He says, I'm a letting agent. I can state without doubt that the worst recyclers tend to be younger people, especially students. Why? Is it just a general laziness, a general fecklessness, or are there more substantive reasons for it? And then he adds, my mother lives in California. They have their street waste weighed weekly, and they get a sum of money for the street dependent upon the weight of items recycled. So obviously we need more incentives, more carrots as opposed to sticks in this conversation. But why would that be? Why would it be on both fronts, on recycling and on cutting the amount of flights you take each year? The oldest people in the country are doing the most and the youngest people in the country are doing the least. I want you to tell me why you think that is. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Young people failing to act on carbon concerns when I think the widespread perception is that young people are kind of leading the line on carbon concerns. And in fact, speaking as a smack in the middle of these age demographics, which isn't going to be true for much longer, I'll be up the top end in 3 years' time. Gosh. I would have thought that people my age almost feel a little bit guilt-tripped by younger people when it comes to matters environmental. What's happened? Has something changed? Maybe these numbers would have been different a few years ago. Thinking about long-haul flights and my own children, actually. And when we ruled them out a while ago, I have heard whispers, certainly from one of them, about how nice it would be to go to Thailand or somewhere like that, which we kind of knocked off the agenda for environmental reasons not that long ago. Maybe the pendulum is swinging for slightly sinister reasons. If you look at the British media and how much effort has been put into persuading us that eco concerns are bogus. No, but that doesn't work either, because then you'd think that 65-plus-year-olds would be much more susceptible to that. There's lots of things to get your teeth into, and we will begin after this.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 18 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. You're not allowed cop-out answers, for example, from Emma, that you young people can't afford flights. It's a conscious decision to take fewer flights for environmental reasons. And to be fair, you can get a flight to, I don't know, 29 quid these days, can't you? You could go somewhere. 18 minutes after 12 is the time. Lisa is in Islington. What's going on, Lisa?
Oh, hi, James. Hello. I heard your question specifically about the older generation and why they recycle more. And I just thought of my mum. She died last April.
I'm sorry.
And thank you. And she always used to say, I have 2 children, and she always used to say she felt very responsible for the world she was leaving behind for my children, her grandchildren.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and
How old are your children, if you don't mind me asking?
They're similar to your age, your children. I've got a 17-year-old and a 14-year-old, and my mother used to recycle everything. My dad's the same. He's still with us. He recycles everything. And yeah, she used to say, I just think we are so responsible for our children's children and the type of environment we're going to create for them if we don't take responsibility now. So.
Well, that makes perfect sense in a way, and yet it seems to be completely at odds with what with the media representation. I always think of it as being a young person's obsession, but actually, possibly the older you get, the more conscious you are of the future, because when you're young, you think you're going to live forever and everything's going to be great.
That's so true. And I also think, we just become, I think once you have children, and once you get older, you become so much more emotional and so much more in sort of touch with everything. You have such a broader vision of things, I think, than when you're younger and you just have yourself to sort of look after. But
what are your youngsters like? Do your youngsters recycle less than their granddad?
No, they're pretty good actually. But I was just thinking about this, and I wonder whether it's because I'm a similar age to you, and I think my children, they've grown up with me recycling. So it's like, what bin does that go in, Mum? And you're like, well, it's that one. But I wonder whether there is a generation that perhaps grew up and just missed out on that urgency. So perhaps their parents weren't quite in that.
They're just slightly older. Because, 18 to 24 is the lowest, followed by 25 to 34. Then it jumps pretty quickly to 73% from 59. And then it's all the other 3 generations, 45 to 54, 55 to 64, and 65 plus, are all in the 80s. So there might be something in that. So they haven't had it passed on to them, and they haven't felt the finger of fate on their shoulder warning them that they have responsibilities for what they leave behind when they move on. Were you surprised then or not when I read out these numbers?
I think I was, but I'm not really in touch with the sort of 20, 30-year-olds, because
that's
I'm
true.
in my 50s and my children are teenagers and I've got my parents. So I don't know.
We both need help. We both need for 18 to 34-year-olds to tell us why they think their generation is so bad at recycling. Thank you, Lisa. Dave in Thetford's been in touch. He says, hi, James, our 24-year-old doesn't put anything into landfill. It's all under his bed and all over the floor in his room. 22 after 12 is the time. Ben's in Shrewsbury. Ben, what would you like to say?
So I think it's very much like a generational thing, James. So older people typically won't have been used to the convenience of general day-to-day life that younger people kind of are privileged to.
Yeah,
so,
you mean like disposability and the easy kind of, not technology necessarily, but just having everything at your fingertips and easy to access. Yeah. Okay.
So everything's on next day delivery. Everything's quick packed, easy, ready. Everything's disposable, quick and easy to throw away. Whereas I think older people would have been maybe used to a time where things weren't so easy, and you had to wash your nappies and all that kind of stuff, and not just chuck stuff away.
So recycling might be motivated, because we presume it's motivated by carbon concerns and footprints, but it might actually just be a mindset that is to do with making do and mending, as opposed to trying to protect the environment.
Yeah,
that's like a bonus of recycling. But no, that doesn't work, because it's the bins at the bottom of the garden, Ben. It's like you're going down there with a box of stuff and you're putting your tins in. You're not saving them for a rainy day. You're just putting them in different bins, aren't you?
Yeah. I guess so.
I don't think that quite works. What do you do? How old are you?
I'm 40. I make sure I recycle everything, so I keep all my plastics, my tins, everything separately. And where I live, I've got a bin store as opposed to separate bins, so I just put them all in separate bags and take them all over once every couple of days and put them in the relevant bins. Yeah.
And so why do you think 18 to 24-year-olds would be measurably less conscientious than you at doing this? Because you're only 40. You're only 40. You're not like 65 plus.
No, I'm not. No, for sure. I kind of sit right in the middle, I guess, don't I? Again, I just think it's that whole convenience thing. I just think it's just they're kind of used to just
easy come, easy go.
Easy come, easy go. You buy it, you chuck it in the bin, it's done. They don't necessarily have to worry about that. Or maybe they're not.
Go on. Sorry.
Enough on it at school. I don't know.
Well, I'd have thought they'd have had it, driven down their throats at school. I'd have thought that they'd have been getting loads more on recycling at school than my generation or your generation did. It's a popular thought, though. Owen picks up on that. The older generation grew up in the war, so they'll be more conscious about recycling and reusing. Well, I give you reusing, Owen and Ben. You can have that. If you grew up in the war, you go, oh, yes, we'll put the tea bags on the washing line, use them again tomorrow, all that. But that's not recycling. That's reusing. So you can see why you'd reuse, but it doesn't explain why you'd recycle. And I would put money on 18 to 34-year-olds having had way more guidance at school on recycling. It wasn't even a thing when I was a kid. I can't remember, when did recycling even become a thing? Whereas these kids have grown up with it. Everywhere they turn, it would be normal to have a bunch of bins or to be encouraged to do this. At school, they probably have recycling bins in the canteen, don't they? I know we've got them here. So why? Why is it? I mean, maybe I'm overthinking it, and it's just young people are always going to be a little less conscientious, a little lazier than some of their older counterparts. Rick's in Sheffield. Rick, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. So I think I'm one of the older people. I'm 43, so I'm not exactly over the hill.
No, you're in cohort 3.
Yeah, exactly.
73% of your cohort recycle as much as possible, which is quite a lot less than the older and quite a lot more. You're almost like a weird bridging gap, quite a lot more than the younger and quite a lot less than the older.
I think that the answer to your question is that once you go down this path and you buy into it, which is a case of a combination of exposure, perhaps growing up a bit, perhaps just, and I don't mean that in a negative way, I mean that some old people need to grow up, some young people have already grown up in this kind of responsible for your environment approach. Once you go down that path, it opens new doors. The recycling itself is just a measurement of how eco you are, effectively. So some people like myself, I mean, I've got solar panels on the roof, I've got batteries, I've got an electric vehicle. I've done all these things because once my eyes were open to what we do to the environment, there's almost no turning back. And everything you learn on top of that reinforces it.
But this is why they use Greta Thunberg in the opening paragraph, because I think the natural presumption would be that younger people are a lot more likely to have arrived at the place you've just described than older people are.
But it takes time, and you've got to read those books.
Really?
And when you,
I thought younger people were being taught those books.
They are, but like that in itself, to change your mind and to change yourself can sometimes take years, James, of self-reflection and kind of trying to, I mean, when you're young, you've got all sorts of things, whether it be boyfriends, girlfriends, parties, university, all these things are on your mind.
Mm.
As you get older, you have more time to reflect on what you do. And for some people, that lesson is learned day one. For some people, it's learned.
No, I guess I didn't think that for the younger generation it was a personal journey in the way that it would be for your generation or for mine, because they were being bombarded with the relevant information on a level that was utterly alien to when we were that age. So but you make a really powerful point. It doesn't matter what people tell you, how many fingers are being wagged in your face. You've got to make this leap for yourself, and the older you are, the more likely you are to have made it. Speaking of old, quite a few of you correctly pointing out that the World War II thing might be a little bit dodgy, given that if you were, of an age to remember the Second World War, it doesn't really work, does it? That's my age. I just presume there are still people around who can remember the Second World War, but it's highly unlikely. You'd be well into your 80s now if you were born in 1939, wouldn't you? Or born in 1940. So it's highly unlikely that anyone can remember rationing. Don't at me if you can remember rationing. I appreciate that some people will be able to. It's coming up to, it's just gone 28 minutes after 12. And reducing the number of flights, that's pure eco. That's got nothing to do with reusing and recycling and make, do and mend. I don't get it. James, I'm 27, says Alex in Havering. I recycle everything I can, compost all my food waste and grow my own veg. I've phantom planted fruit trees in some local parks and feel the need to utilise as much as I can. I have a very utilitarian attitude towards life, but it's not necessarily to save the planet. That's interesting, but from a 27-year-old, not from a 65 plus. Why? Why would this be upside down in terms of what we might have expected? Rick, take care, thank you. Chris is in Canary Wharf. Chris, what would you like to say?
Well, I'm in Canary Wharf at the moment because that's where I work, and I work in a co-working space, and I'm surrounded by young people. I'm 1 year older than you. I'm 53,
right.
So which makes me very much. Oh, okay.
Yeah, right. Carry on.
And so I think that I've noticed this that younger people in their 20s, don't put the plastics and the recycle stuff in the right bin, and this environment has actually made it to make it really, really easy for people, and it infuriates me. Let's say, and if they go, I'll go and go into the bin and move things into the right bin if I can, and if it's not too icky to do so.
Well, I mean, good for you. But are you surprised by this? Would you have expected it to be the other way around? And why do you think it isn't?
Well, I was surprised by it when I first started working here about a year and a half ago, but I have had a lot of time to think about it, and I think it is because when you're younger, you're going to be, well, I think in this environment, let's say the younger people are working longer hours. They're not going to have their own houses, maybe live more in a flat share or house share environment. And so they're not going to have their own allotments where they're growing their own food and stuff. So there's less opportunity to actually recycle. So it's less about commitment and about opportunity.
And familiarity. But habit.
Yes.
So it's habitual behaviour for you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's habitual, but as I said, it's taken me a while to get here. And
you sound like Rick in Sheffield. But so I'm 21 and I'm standing next to you, and I've finished my burger, and there's a bin there that is supposed to put my burger carton in, and a bin there that I'm not. Why am I not putting it in the correct bin? Because I've never got into the habit of doing it, and yet my generation has had the carbon footprint stuff rammed down our throats since kindergarten.
As I said, you're not just throwing that away. You need to make sure that all the bits of lettuce and stuff can't go in there. Yeah. So it's a lot more complicated than just doing that. And you've got to get back to your desk to get on.
There could be something in that. It is like everyone's on a similar tip on this one. Yes, that is initially very shocking, but or surprising. It's not shocking, but the more you think about it, perhaps the more sense it made. What I haven't had and the demographics of my listenership give me great confidence that I could have this, is someone in that category, someone in that cohort. You are aged 18 to, let's say, 34, and you don't recycle much. Why not? Just tell me why not. Don't be shy. I'm not here to judge you. 0345 606 0973 is the number you need. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
12:35 is the time, and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, for which, of course, I thank you. I'm being very conscious this week of not annoying you by mentioning my new book too much, so I've got to 12:35 today, but it is published on Thursday, so I think I'm allowed to mention it once a show. Shall we? Actually, you decide. Let's do a text vote. How often should I be allowed to mention my new book this week, given that it's publication week? Once a show, twice a show, once an hour, every junction? I don't know. And there's an interesting piece, a lovely piece about me and indeed it in The Guardian today. Should you be in need of something to pin up on your bedroom wall, there's a rather lovely picture as well on the front of the G2 section. So allow me just that little moment. How They Broke Britain is published on Thursday. And I think it's fair to say that the central thesis has not been overtaken by events. Quite the opposite, in fact. 12:36 is the time. Back to this bizarre question. Why do young people recycle less and fly more than older people? The flying one's not actually quite... Yeah, no, it is. Yeah, no, it holds. I'm looking at the average instead of the cohort. Why do they recycle less and fly more than much, much, much older people? In fact, the older you are, the more likely you are to recycle completely and indeed to fly less than you used to. I suppose reducing the number of flights you take if you're aged 18 to 24 is close to meaningless, isn't it? Because any flights that you took up until the age of 18 were determined by your mum or dad, weren't they? Determined by your parents or your carer. You're not exactly going to be thinking, I might just pop over to Acapulco for the weekend. You can do that when you're older, but not when... So there are variables here, but the central thrust, I think, is interesting. Shane's in Leeds. Shane, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Welcome back.
Thank you, Shane.
Hope you enjoyed your holiday.
It was very pleasant.
Did you fly?
No, I didn't. I went to Norfolk, so I don't even know if you... Well, you can fly into Norwich, I suppose, into Norwich Airport, but no, definitely not. We were in the trusty Volvo.
Well, I can't answer the question about recycling, but I do think I know why young people fly more, and that's social media.
Go on.
The Instagram, for example, the number of people traveling to places where they can get Instagrammable pictures, that's a big reason for people to travel the way they do. And now, I must admit, I love flying. I love traveling.
I do too.
And there's a lot of stuff on social media out there.
How do you know? What sort of, are you following a lot of influencers, Shane?
I follow a number of aviation influencers.
Okay.
And they make it look very easy to travel the world, to do all these glamorous things, to go to all these... There's a watch chap who went to Kazakhstan the other day. It was very nice. And, you know, to show people that...
But you're not a play. When you say aviation influencers, are we talking about sort of plane spotter types?
No.
People who love flying, travel buffs,
travel bloggers. Yes.
Yeah, but that's. Oh, so I'm getting confused because I'm thinking of somebody glamorous taking a picture of their dinner while wearing a bikini, which also encourages flying. But they're not the kind of influencers that you follow, I sense.
No. We're talking about the people who who specifically do things like airline reviews.
Okay. And that's become a thing, and the more that's grown up, the more likely people are to fly. But that would not... But I mean, I don't want to malign you, but surely this is... The aviation enthusiast thing is more an older person's game than a 20-something's game.
No.
Oh, okay.
No, it's not. Because they show how easy it is to travel, to get these... particularly, they show you how to get cheap flights. How to travel to some of these far-off places that most people probably would even consider traveling to. Central Asia, the former Soviet republics. And a lot of people do follow do follow them, and a lot of them are quite young. You know,
Okay.
they're showing, for example, how easy it is for them to get a business class flight to certain places, and young people will want to follow that because that's where they're getting their influences from. You know, older. I mean, I'm a cohort 3, so but
35 to 44.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you're the bridge. So you're doing it. So but so you don't worry much about your carbon footprint when it comes to flying.
I have to travel to the Far East because my family are out there.
Okay.
My family live there, so I have to go there to see them. But I mean, I want the aviation industry to become more carbon efficient, and I think there are political reasons and
yes, probably.
reasons of profit why that doesn't happen.
Yeah, but you so okay. So I don't know how big an influence the aviation influence would have on an entire population, but it probably doesn't have to be that big to move the needle, does it? To swing the pendulum a bit. And you're living in an environment where quite a lot of the stuff you're exposed to is making air travel look very normal, very commonplace, whereas perhaps older people who grew up through that era of the popularisation of commercial air travel have come out the other end of it and are just thinking a little bit more about their carbon footprint. This is fascinating. Thank you, Shane. 12:41 is the time. Jamie is in Birmingham. Jamie, what would you like to say?
So I'm 30 years old, and
Right.
I'll be honest, I don't really recycle very much myself.
Why not?
I find it's a convenience thing for me. I think, like in the kitchen, keeping an extra bag with the bin, putting in dirty bacon wrappers. I'll put cardboard boxes in the recycling, or maybe some plastic bottles. But everything is just a fuss, like some other listeners have mentioned.
Yeah, fair enough.
But I think kind of one of the strongest opinions I have, and I don't know if it is the same amongst other younger listeners, is that all the things that we do as individuals isn't going to make the difference. It's the bigger companies, it's the celebrities, it's the people with lots of money who need to make those changes. The whole plastic straw situation, all the plastic straws in the sea going up turtles' noses. If you actually look at a lot of the plastic waste in the sea, it comes from the fishing industry. So how much of a difference did change it from?
I don't know if I've never been a big fan of either ors, Jamie. I'm not going to do anything until they do. So why doesn't everyone just do their best? And then you can call upon other people to do more, but you can't use them not doing their bit as an excuse for you not doing yours. That's just silly.
But then it's not just I'm not doing my bit because nobody else is.
That is what you said. That is what you just said.
It's like, obviously I don't do everything in the recycling, and it is an annoying thing.
But here is 88% of 65-plus-year-olds recycling as much as possible, so they are leading from the front. You're just not following.
And I kind of feel like it's, look at me, I'm doing all of my recycling. When actually
this was
it's not making the
This was a
difference.
poll. They were asked. They didn't go marching up and down the street, knocking on your window, telling you how much recycling they were doing. They were just, of course it makes a difference. The more that is done, the more difference is made. But you sound like one of those people who say, "Oh, what's the point of having a congestion charge because China is doing coal mining or something like that." There's never an excuse for doing less.
It does feel like that a little bit. Celebrities taking 15-minute plane rides. All of the plane rides that I'll take in my life will be outdone by a couple of trips from one individual.
They just sound a bit jealous, really.
I probably am quite jealous of their holidays, to be fair. I probably would take more flights if I could.
You've kind of undone your own argument there. So the only reason you've got a problem with them doing it is because you can't. And then I guess you can feel a bit patronised or condescended to when they turn around and say people should fly less. But then you'll find loads of examples of people flying less, and you won't even know about them because the kind of places.
I was in London this weekend, and some friends came over. One travelled from Holland, and he came over on the trains rather than flying. So he made a conscious not to take the flight.
There you go.
Train.
So that was his reason for doing it, was it? He genuinely wanted to minimise his carbon footprint.
Good. Yeah, came up in conversation at the weekend, and it did make me think a little bit. And maybe you are right. The more people you see doing it, it does make a difference.
I hope so. I
still feel like more changes from above need to come.
Yeah, except that it does sound like a bit of a cop-out, or at least it's certainly not either or. In fact, your complaint that they're not doing more becomes more powerful the more you do, because then you're preaching from a position of walking the walk rather than just demanding that people who talk the talk also walk the walk. And actually probably a record. We haven't mentioned Brexit, and it's nearly 1:45, but Brexit has actually made it harder to travel to and from continental Europe by train because of the impact that it's had on the Eurostar. But hey-ho, on we go.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
Gosh, is that the time? 12:48 already. 18 to 24-year-olds least likely to recycle as much as possible. Least likely to have reduced the number of flights they take a year. 65 plus, most likely. Why? Lots of interesting answers, but I'm going to share my favourite with you now. Milk bottles. Milk bottles. So if you are of a certain age, then you would have had recycled milk bottles at home and at school. Every morning you would have put the empty, rinsed out milk bottles on your front doorstep. So perhaps the normalisation of recycling is a point we've missed. It was the normal thing to do when we were growing, albeit only with milk bottles, but extending it to everything else, like your orange juice cartons and the rest of it, does, I think, create the possibility that recycling it comes more naturally. Here you go. Dave adds to it. He says, I'm similar age to you. My earliest memories of recycling are of my mother putting out the milk bottles. My earliest commercial venture was in the very early 70s, taking pop bottles back to the shop to get the deposit back. That's true, that. So, I mean, glass, I guess, is the most obviously and easily recyclable, but we seem to have gone backwards on that, presumably because it's just so much cheaper to stick pop in plastic bottles. Was it the Corona man who used to come around like a milkman? I always promised myself I'd never turn into one of those radio presenters who does this kind of stuff. Was it the Corona man? Oh, don't you miss Spangles? I used to love a Spangle, I did. Oh, Texans. But a little bit of nostalgia goes a long way. I'm pretty sure that the Corona... Don't ring in. But yeah, and this as well was the one that gave me the idea. Boomers were raised on recycled milk bottles at home and at school. Rag and bone men. And switch the lights off. If you're every dad in the country would march around the house turning all the lights off, announcing that he's not the electricity board. Do I look like Midlands Electricity? And of course, as Keith points out, washable nappies as well. So maybe this is all very interesting. Barbara is in Swaffham, which I drove through on Friday. Barbara, what would you like to say?
Hello there.
Hello.
Well, I guess I might be a little bit older than my years because I'm 57.
Yes.
And I think I come into the category of people who recycle as much as possible. It's something that causes me a great deal of angst and creates an awful lot of mess in my house.
The amount of recycling that you do creates mess?
Yeah, because I'm waiting for a trip to the supermarket, or I'm waiting for a trip to the dump, or I'm waiting for a trip to my local green shop that will take empty glass jars and
so
bottles.
You save
to
absolutely everything until you can dispose of it responsibly.
Yeah, absolutely. And it drives my husband nuts, and he says, why can't we just have a reset and just throw everything in the bin? Because I agree with him, the house is a mess, but, there are tidy areas. But yes,
that's the curate's egg approach
to manage, and it's time as well.
Yes, of course.
I spent forever, taking apart jiffy bags that have got plastic bubble wrap in the middle and paper on the outside.
That is extreme.
It does cause me a great deal of angst. But I just feel as though, from my perspective, at my age, I have seen so many real changes to the weather and the climate in these last 4 or 5 decades, and I've seen it with my own eyes, and I feel it, in the summers, and
you see it where you are. I mean, more than ever at the moment in Norfolk, isn't it, with the flooding and stuff that was just going on last week?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just wonder if my generation feel a little sense of responsibility because we were part of that process that has created...
Trying to make up for things you've done in the past, whereas the younger people, someone sent me a message saying, it's all very well for us. We've been on exotic foreign holidays, but if you've never been to Marrakesh, Filey just won't cut it, which sort of is an interesting point as well. You think, well, I've seen Bangkok by moonlight, so we'll go to Wells next to the sea for our holiday this year.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's an element of that. I mean, my mum used to work for an airline, and she used to get tickets that cost her 1%, and every year we used to go away. We used to see family in the States one summer. We used to go to see family in Australia another summer. We used to come to England another summer. And we just did that cycle for as long as I was growing up, probably until I was about 10 years old and my parents retired. But I just have a sense also that, if you're young and an older person says to you, try and give them the benefit of your experience.
Yeah,
they really don't want to listen. They don't want to take advice from older people.
So you just got to do actions, not words.
And you've got to just experience things for yourself to realise that actually my parents were right and they said this and they said that, and I never took any notice. And I sometimes wonder, because the younger generation haven't actually been through this climate change and they haven't seen it for real with their own eyes.
They've only seen what they see, which is the now of it.
Yeah, this is what they're born into. That
really
they
good
don't
point.
actually realise how bad it really is. I mean, I've got a son who's 30.
Yeah.
And he's got a wife who's nearly 30, and they have a 2-year-old. So this is my 2-year-old granddaughter.
Yes.
And I think if things have changed so much in the last 40, 50 years in my lifetime, how on earth, how bad is it going to be for her when she's my age?
Mm.
And I feel a really deep sense of responsibility to do my bit.
Which
and
makes
I just
perfect
hope that
sense.
everyone else does.
Yeah,
You know.
and it does explain why this age imbalance kicks in. How significant do you think it is that you live in the shadow of that wonderful wind turbine that they shut recently?
I've actually been up the stairs.
So have I.
And I walked round it, yeah. And I won't say what my husband said when he got to the top of the stairs, but he didn't feel particularly fit.
Okay. But it is all because that's shut now. The Green Britain Centre, all of those things, which I thought were encouraging the younger generation to be a lot more conscious of carbon footprints and things like that, seem to have led us off in the opposite direction. Thank you, Barbara, and forgive me for just cynically shoehorning in my local knowledge at the end there. 12:54 is the time. Ruben's in Liverpool. Ruben, what would you like to say? What's going on? Talk to me about the age imbalance here.
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on. I hope you had a good holiday.
It was lovely, thank you.
I've just come back from holiday as well. I spent 3.5 weeks in South America.
Okay.
And I believe very strongly that, climate change is the worst thing facing us currently. So you could easily call me a hypocrite for taking those long-haul flights. But my response would be, first of all, well, it was the only flight that I've taken in the last 18 months and probably won't take for another 2 years another flight. But also, if you believe, which I do, really, that in the next 20 or 30 years, climate change may well spell the end of society as we know it, that we may be facing a global collapse that we can't even comprehend, then... as your text touched on,
I know what you're going to say next, and it's going to make me laugh.
Why should I not take the one opportunity that
If the world is going to end, why shouldn't I see Bangkok by moonlight?
Well, absolutely, James.
Yeah.
Why shouldn't I see Machu Picchu?
Why shouldn't I do a full moon party in Koh Samui and get absolutely banjaxed?
And I don't believe, as you said, it's either or. I don't, what your caller before last said, I don't agree with that. You should be recycling everything you can, which I do. But also, if I were to answer that poll, I do recycle in one hand everything I can, but on the other hand, I don't compost because I can't, because we don't really have a garden or a compost bin in Liverpool. We don't have a separate bin for that. We don't have 7 bins yet. We've only got 2. So if I can't do that, do I put down on the survey that I do recycle everything I can, or that I don't? Because obviously this is self-reported.
Yeah,
I think a lot of young people are aware of what we're not doing,
and they might have they'd have a different.
Might not be aware of what they could be doing that they're not doing.
A different definition of as much as possible. I think you're right, but then we're sort of questioning the nature of the polling rather than the result, which is valid. Final question, briefly: how big a part of your decision to go to South America was, I want to see Machu Picchu before the world burns?
Genuinely, it was a part of my decision.
No,
it wasn't a huge part, but it was a part of my decision because I did think...
Did it cross your mind?
Yeah, I did think, should we really be taking these flights? But I do also think, we haven't really taken a holiday in 2 years, and we probably won't.
I'm not judging you. I was just intrigued by that because I mean, it's a comical analysis until it isn't, and the idea that, well, why wouldn't I go off and do so? Seriously, if the world is going to fall apart in 20 years' time, what's the point in not going on a nice exotic holiday? Thank you, Ruben, and welcome back. I'm glad you enjoyed your holiday. I'll squeeze in one more. Liam's in Stourbridge. Liam, what would you like to say?
Hello again, James. Good to speak to you.
Likewise.
So in Stourbridge, we struggle. We don't have any plastic recycling available at our flat. We don't have any cardboard recycling available at our flat. So we're only limited to what we can recycle, which is glass, cans and newspapers.
Unless you're like the lady in Swaffham and you save it all up until you can go somewhere else and recycle it. But that's a different...
I was going to say that's another problem with a lot of the younger people today. They're working full-time Monday to Friday when the tips are open. A lot of the times they're not open on the Saturdays. And when they are open on the Saturdays, trying to book a slot to actually go and drop them off in there in
Fair
that time
enough.
period is very difficult.
So if you're retired,
So
it's going to be a lot easier to do all the recycling you want to do. So are you a frustrated recycler? You would like to do more, but you can't?
yeah, absolutely. Like
Okay.
I used to live in a place where we literally kept everything, and then we did a big tip run as we were a big house. But then they actually had a problem with us all coming and doing it together as like a one big load. They wanted us to go in individual cars rather than going and doing it as one big lot. So I think there is a bit of a lack of support by local councils. And I also, as I was speaking to your researcher, I think because a lot of people now rent, they don't have as much pride in their properties in their local areas because it's not there
or as
home.
much investment. They're not making decisions based upon being there for the next 20 years or being there for... I think you're right. I'm cracking on, Liam, only because I glanced at the time and I thought on my first day back from holiday, I may as well hand over to Sheila Fogarty bang on time for what will probably be the last time in 2023. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player. You can pause, rewind live radio. It's all there, including all Global's live radio stations. Tom Sawbrick will be with you at 4 and Sheila Fogarty is with you now.
Hello. Welcome back.
Thank you.
James O'Brien on LBC.